things about it.
Ben, he's quite the game player.
Ben is very competitive. I don't go anywhere near him when he plays games, including watching football. I had somewhere.
And the gifts for winning were amazing.
Yeah.
Thanks to Karen.
Well, he came home with this.
Welcome all you who are on the recording, and anyone who's joining the live stream in a moment. Usually by the time I'm finished with this, welcome. We're going to get going here. We are on, I believe, lesson 6, although the lesson is the Cosmic War. I think this is number 6, although my copy has some heading issues. It says 6, all right. Before we begin, I actually want to take just a moment to go over a little bit of schedule stuff with you guys. I'll probably do this again at the end. Maybe I should do it in the middle too, but I'm going to do it at the beginning and at the end. After today's class, we're going to have a break before we reconvene. Next week, so a week from today, we will not be having class. Rivercliff is hosting the Black Clergy Caucus, and basically the whole of the 2 buildings are going to be mostly reserved for that. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's Black Clergy Caucus and LCMS, but it's not, I think, limited to the LCMS, and it's not limited to clergy either. So, but very exciting. Happy to be able to host them, but just for scheduling reasons, we're not going to meet next week. The following week, so 2 weeks from today, we will also not be meeting because I'm on vacation. So that is a more standard thing that we would typically
Where are you going? We don't mind.
I'm going down. Yeah. You want to drive down to Central Florida? Go for it. I will host the class for you there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'm on vacation that Wednesday. We will be reconvening in 3 weeks. So this will be the last one for a couple of weeks, but we will keep going. My assumption at this point, since I did miss the week 2 weeks ago or something like that, my assumption is that we can still finish before Thanksgiving. So 8 days before Thanksgiving, which is our standard time to finish off this block of classes. The last lesson, if you have the digital copy and you've looked ahead, the last lesson is just the second half of 22. My guess, because I haven't read through the whole thing, my guess is they do a lot of wrap up and review and that kind of thing, which is wonderful, but I'm terrible at conclusions, so we probably can condense that and cover the last 2 lessons together, I think. If we get further behind because we take too long on a lesson, or if it doesn't look like we can finish up as we need to, we have been gifted what we around the office are calling a freebie week, a bonus week. We have a full week after Thanksgiving before Advent starts. So we might be continuing with one final class the week after Thanksgiving, although I don't think we're going to need that week. But in case you're worried that I'm not going to get through it, I think that we have a bonus week built in. So, to summarize, especially for the 4 folks who have come on, next week, no class, 2 weeks, no class, 3 weeks, yes class. And we should be done around about Thanksgiving. Now, before we do dive into today's lessons, are there any questions from last week or previous weeks that you have for me? And for those watching on the live stream, I think that you can type and I can see it. No one's ever done that for the YouTube streams, so I don't know if I can see it or not. But you can. That's theoretically a thing that can happen. So you are welcome if you're on the live stream to ask questions. If you're watching the recording, you're also welcome to ask questions. They pop up on the rare occasion that I go onto the YouTube studio. They will pop up and I can make sure I answer them there. All right, well, today we are covering quite a bit, at least in theory. We are looking to cover, I'm on the wrong page here, chapters 12, 13, and 14, although they've done kind of what they do somewhat frequently in that they have kind of clipped off the last chunk of 14, which, unlike other times where they've cut things out, and I said, no, that's a bad decision. If we don't cover the second portion of chapter 14, I think we can manage. we can at least cover it in brief. So, let's go in. And by the way, if you have been waiting anxiously, as I know at least one of you was because you walked in and said, it's 666. We're finally covering the number, right? With probably the second most recognized number out of the book of Revelation being that 144,000, mainly because of Jehovah's Witnesses and other groups that really misconstrue that number. I think 666 is the most famous number in Revelation. It might be the most famous number in the Bible generally. 12 is probably up there too, but everyone knows 666 because it makes it into every bad horror movie. Although The Omen's are pretty good. I like it, but that's neither here nor there. But we will cover that number today. So, we got to get there first. Can I have a volunteer to read Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 through 6? Thank you, Mark.
Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Then being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail drew a third of the stars of heaven, and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, who was ready to give birth, to devour her child as soon as it was born. She bore a male child, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and his throne. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days.
All right. So, those of you who are here can probably see on the live stream it is definitely harder to see, but I do have a chart up here to kind of help us work through primarily this section, although I've added a few other bits. And so we have kind of 3 characters, if you will, that are introduced to us in this section. The first is a woman, the second is a dragon, and the third is a child, although that's not, I wrote it that way on purpose. I wrote it out of order, it's okay. I know, it'll be all right. We'll manage. And so what I want to do is I want to figure out, well, what's going on? What is going on with these images? And this is one of these portions in the book of Revelation where I'm just going to say John, although this is a vision John received. He didn't author it in the way that other authors of Scripture had their own creativity involved. This was given directly to John. We have kind of layered meaning here. And for the life of me, I feel like I had 3 layers when I went through this about a year ago, and I couldn't think of what all 3 of them were. So I've given us 2 layers of meaning where there's kind of, it's nested upon one another. And so how I've labeled this to help you with other things in the Lutheran theology is I've labeled them the narrow sense and the broad sense. We talk about this a lot in Lutheran theology. We say, you know, in the narrow sense of this doctrine, this is what we're talking about. In the broad sense of this doctrine, this is what's going on. So a good way to think about this is a law and gospel, right? We can just talk about the law, right? In the narrow sense, the law of God is the things that you should and shouldn't do, right? I mean, it's certainly the narrow sense is broader even than that, but that's the narrow sense. The broad sense, as I teach my confirmands, the broad sense of the law is God's will for his creation. Everywhere, right? So in the broad sense, when we talk about God's law, we're talking about things like gravity are included in this, along with how you should and shouldn't behave. But in the narrow sense, when we speak of God's law, it's just, you know, behavioral kind of stuff, right? And so when we talk about things, we can say, well, there's a narrow sense of the term, and there's a broad sense of the term. I've kind of done that here just to help us understand these sorts of things. And so we have here what I'm calling a narrow sense and a broad sense. And I wrote the woman first, but I want to start actually with the child, because I think we can manage this one. All right? the child in this reading. Right? And remember, this is a metaphorical, or I guess you could say an allegorical sense here. Who is this child?
Jesus.
It's Jesus, right? Well done. Exactly. So our child, in, we'll just say the narrow sense for right now, is Jesus. All right? The child's Jesus. Who's the woman then in the narrow sense?
Mary?
It's Mary, right? Well, who gave birth to Jesus, right? All right, so if we have Jesus in the narrow sense, we have Mary in the narrow sense, and the fiery red dragon.
Devil.
Right, we're just going to say Satan right now, for no particular reason, and that's not me foreshadowing something for later, but I'm just going to write Satan. All right, so we have these three characters, if you will, and we can recognize something pretty interesting about this. In fact, Pastor Jordan, I think a year ago, taught about this in his Sunday morning class, right? He said we should add something to our nativity scenes, right? Well, what does this account sound a lot like? So we'll pause here for a second. We've seen earlier in the book, in chapters 4 and 5, yes, in chapters 4 and 5, we saw what biblical narrative event?
The birth of Jesus.
Yes, in this one, that's what we're seeing. In 4 and 5, what did we see? Does anyone remember?
Crucifixion.
Not quite the crucifixion, the ascension, right? We saw the ascension. From what perspective do we see the biblical narrative event of the...
From heaven.
We saw it from heaven's perspective, right? So chapters 4 and 5, we see... I think I said it this way, right? The disciples watch Jesus go up, he disappears, and then John sees him reappear in chapters 4 and 5 of Revelation, right? This is heaven's perspective on the ascension narrative. We have a similar thing going on here. In our reading for today, we have heaven's perspective on which narrative? You had it a second ago.
The birth of Jesus.
The birth of Christ, right? So what I want you to do, I'm going to read through it again, and I want you to think about Christmas, right? Think about the Christmas season. Think about the Christmas story, what you know about it, and see if you see any parallels there, right? A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour him. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. Right? Now, there's extra information in here, right? But what parallels do we see between this reading and the nativity story, if you will?
Well, could be when who was it, Herod sent...
You got the hardest one there, Mark, but so we'll come back to that. My recollection is that in the Christmas story, there's a pregnant woman, right? Do you remember that part? It's a pretty key element, right? There's also a child, and the child is born, and then what happens? Right, and we're kind of pushing some time together here, right?
It was Herod who sent out to destroy the children.
Yes, it's called the martyrdom of the innocents,
yes,
right? The slaughter of the innocents, right? It is technically a festival day. Festival seems a bit wrong in the church year, although we never celebrate it. Instead, it's also paired with the circumcision of Jesus and the Sunday after Christmas. And so, who knows? We can do any one of those. But we have, right, Christ who is about to be devoured by Herod here, right? And then what happens, and we have a little bit of a separation here between accounts, because again, there's more going on, but we're just kind of getting here. How is Jesus saved from the destruction that Herod is bringing? They flee through the wilderness, right? How do you get to Egypt from a biblical standpoint? You got to go through the wilderness, right? And so the flight through the wilderness is the salvation, right? Is how to escape the dragon. All right, are you seeing the connections here? Okay. Well, go ahead.
Well, the great sign in heaven, isn't that the star? Or what it's not?
It could be. You could say the great sign in heaven appeared, but the great sign in heaven is a woman clothed, right? So that's what that colon there is meant to indicate, right? There's a great sign. What is this great sign? There's a woman, right? And the sign here, just think there's a vision, not necessarily star. The word is the same in Greek for like a thing that you see on the road that tells you where to go, a prophetic vision sort of sign, which is kind of what's going on here, and just a great big thing that you see. It's kind of all the same word, right? And so what is this sign that is seen? Well, it's the woman, right? And we'll talk about the description of her in a little bit here. And then we also have this dragon, right? The dragon, by the way, is, verse 3. And another sign appeared in heaven, right? So I saw something else in heaven, and it was Satan, right? This great red dragon. And then so we have this kind of microcosm of the nativity story. Although there's one detail in here that really can throw us off here. And that is this. Oh, where is it? The second half of verse 5, right? But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. When does that happen, right? The child is Jesus. When is Jesus caught up to God and to his throne?
The ascension.
The ascension. So what Revelation 12, 1 through 5 has done, has taken the entire earthly work of Christ and smushed it together, compressed and compacted it. So we see here the birth of Christ to the ascension of Christ, all at once. And that's partly because Revelation isn't concerned with retelling the entire narrative of Jesus and his earthly ministry, and it's also because of the broad what the vision is meant to push us toward. And so the way we deal with this is, the word is, we deal with this typologically. And if you've hung around me in Old Testament readings long enough, you've probably heard this word before. I'm on and off taught a couple classes here on typology. What this is, what typology is looking through a portion, well, you can do it outside of the Bible, but a portion of the Bible and recognizing greater spiritual insights, right? And the way this typically works, or the way it's easiest to understand, is Christ is projected back into the Old Testament. This is Old Testament interpretation, so not necessarily Revelation. And so, how many of you know the story of David and Goliath? This is my favorite one to do this with. This is real easy, right? And how do we interpret the story of David and Goliath? Well, of course, David fights off Goliath with the stones, and he was very brave, and he trusted in God. So that means that all of you need to be very brave, and with the limited resources God gives you, you need to fight off the giants in your life, right?
That's right.
No! How many of you have heard something like that? It's an extremely popular way to interpret the story of David and Goliath, and it's absolute garbage. It is not a proper understanding of what is going on, right? To use a term, this is eisegesis, which I'm going to just leave there. However, here's a good way to understand kind of the spiritual teaching, the lesson, why the story of David and Goliath is in the Bible. It really happened, right? David and Goliath is not a metaphor or a tall tale or anything. It really happened. But a lot of stuff happened in the Old Testament. Why did this get put in? Well, think of it this way. right? You got Goliath. Goliath's a big bad guy that no one can beat. Who does that sound like? Devil. Good. All right? And then you have a whole bunch of Israelites, right? And the Israelites are doing what? Does anyone remember?
They're shaking.
They're peeing in their armor, right? And I said it like that because now you remember, because I used the word peeing in their armor, right? That phrase. And now you'll remember how this goes, right? The Israelites are peeing in their armor, terrified of Goliath, right? They're shaking in their boots. Now, who does that sound a lot like? Us, right? We're the people peeing in the armor. If you must be in the story of David and Goliath, if you must insert yourself into it, you are one of the Israelites, which is not a great thing, right? Well, it is, right? But we'll get there. Then we have David, right? This mighty chosen one, anointed of God, sent to deal with the problems that Israel can't handle. Who does that sound like? Sounds a lot like Jesus, right? Ooh, and guess what? David is an ancestor of Jesus, so it works out even better, right? So if we're using typology, this is very brief, by the way.
And a shepherd.
To understand, David typifies Christ in an enormous number of ways. But again, this is very brief just to get the point driven, right? David is Jesus, Goliath is the devil, you're a terrified Israelite, Jesus saves you because you can't save yourself, right? That's kind of this way to interpret the Old Testament to understand. You can do this with basically the entire Old Testament, especially the narrative portions. Sometimes it gets really tricky, and you can also go really off the rails with this, so be careful with how you do this, right? I once heard someone try to typify the death of Ahab. Right? Really bad king, dies, shot full of arrows, and what happens to dogs? Lick his wounds as he dies. And oh, that sounds just like Jesus and giving us his blood. That is wrong. That's just, you got to be careful with this. But we can see Revelation, the book, has a lot of typological language. We can use metaphor, allegory, this sort of thing. And so what we see is we have some typological characters in this very brief portion, right? Now, this child who is born to this woman, right, he typifies who? Jesus, right? This one doesn't change. Look at that. It's still Jesus, right? Nice and easy. Well done, Annabeth. All right. We got this big red dragon. He's got lots of heads. He's super scary looking. We'll talk about the details of him in just a minute here. What is this dragon typological? What does it typify?
Satan.
I've said that too many. Yes, it is Satan. Well, yeah, that one didn't change either. So, Pastor, why in the world do you have two columns here? What's the point, right? What about the woman?
Mary.
Church.
It's not Mary. Someone said it. We had the church.
That was a trick.
It was. It was. And so let's take a look at the description of the woman so that you don't think Pastor's just making stuff up. Or Louis Brighton's just making stuff up because I got this all from him. Right? And a great sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. Right? And we're just going to pause there. There's one here that I think predominates the image, although you can get all three in there if you try real hard. What does this look like?
I've seen it in lots and lots of paintings all over the art museums of the world.
Okay.
Yeah, pictures of Mary.
Oh, right. Mary is portrayed this way sometimes. And it's not a wrong thing to do. But for a moment, let's imagine that this is not Mary. Because Mary is typological of something greater.
12 tribes of Israel.
Okay, 12 stars. That's a big hint here, right? 12 stars, that sounds a lot like the 12 tribes. And, oh man.
Disciples?
You know, well, not yet. We're almost there. Let's keep our timeline straight. This is before Jesus is born, right? I happen to remember reading the book of Genesis. I have done that before, by the way. And there was a story in the book of Genesis that had the sun, the moon, and 12 stars. Anyone remember what it was? That dreamer is dreaming again, right? One of Joseph's dreams is the sun, the moon, and 12 stars. Well, I think it's 11 stars, but stars are bowing down to him, right? Now, his immediately is a vision of him in Egypt and his brothers and his parents coming to him for food, right? But the sun, the moon, and the 12 stars, this is Israel, right? In a broad sense. And so this woman is Israel, right? Where did Jesus come from? From which tribe and nation was Jesus?
Judah.
It was Judah, right? He was an Israelite, right? He comes from the line of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah. Oh, I really thought I'd have more. Anyway, I can't remember any others. But, right, through Judah, David and all of that, right? And so, Jesus is born out of Israel, right? There's a way to understand this, again, in metaphor, and say, who is the mother of Jesus? Well, it's Israel. The Old Testament people of God are the mother of Jesus. It's a strange thing to say, but it's also strange to say that Mary had God inside of her, and that's true, right? She was the Theotokos, the God-bearer, which, if you remember my heresy class, we talked about that phrase briefly in Nestorianism. All right, so fast forward or scroll down, if you will, and we have verse 6. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. Now, we covered that number very rapidly last week, because it was used then. I don't need you to remember how we got there, because it's convoluted. Does anyone remember what that number, 1,260, it's the same as 40, 42, time, 2 times and half a time, or 3.5. It's a lot of numbers, right? Or 1365 or something like that. Does anyone remember how we got to that number? Or what that number represents, not how we got there. This is the time of wandering, right? The time of tribulation, right? So in the Old Testament, this number eventually traces its roots back to the 42 years that Israel was wandering in the desert, right? Or 42 years that Israel was in the desert, right? 1 year to Sinai, 1 year from Sinai to the Promised Land, and then 40 years because they didn't trust, right? And so this is that time of trial and tribulation and wandering and waiting. That's Old Testament. If we bring it forward, right, because this is after the ascension, what are we looking at here? In a broad sense. This is the era of the church, right? So the woman stops being Israel, if you will, and starts to be the church. You may have heard language like this before, that the church is your mother. It's a good way to think about it, right? It's the church who has birthed you into the faith and all these sorts of things. We don't talk about it that often, but it definitely does come up. The church has a place prepared to protect it, right? In its time of waiting. Waiting, you've heard me say it before, right? From the ascension to the return of Christ. And so this woman here is Mary, but is also in the broader sense, in the sense that's more relevant to us, this is the church. This is the Old Testament and New Testament people of God, right? Israel and the church, which of course we know from Paul, the church is Israel. It's the true Israel, right? We don't need to go through Romans today, but not all Israel are Israel. It's not the seed of Abraham, it's the faith of Abraham. The church is Israel, right? So if you need to be an Israelite to be saved, all y'all are good because you're in the church, and that's what it really means, right? Questions on this so far? Does this make sense at all? What do you think, Pastor? Don't know what you're smoking. All right. Let's take a look at the dragon now. The dragon, like I said, we figured it out real easy. It's not hard. The dragon is Satan. When I said we have extra information, this is a big chunk of where we get that extra information from, right? So verse 3 is where we're beginning. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on its head 7 diadems. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth so that he might devour the child. So, how is this dragon described? Well, what color is it?
Red.
Red. This is a color that is evocative of evil, blood, sin, all of that kind of stuff. We kind of dealt with this a little bit with that red horseman a few weeks ago. So this is an evil, bad dragon, right? And then the description gets strange, but we've heard a description like this before, so we need to pay careful attention to it, right? 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 diadems. All right, what do you all want to start with? The heads, the horns, or the crowns?
Something easy. The third of the stars, would that be?
Oh, you're getting ahead of us, Mark. We'll get there. Don't you worry. We're looking at the dragon. We'll look at the stars next. But the answer is yes. We'll get there. All right, well, let's start with the horns. Because we did the horns, and I did this very dramatically, right? Who else had a whole bunch of horns on their head? In fact, I think it was 10.
The lamb has 7.
Is it 7 or is it 10? I can't remember. Honestly, I don't remember.
That's back at 5.
Yeah. Or 4.
Five, 6 is the lamb. They had 7 horns, 7
7 on 7. Okay. So the dragon has 10, right? Right now the numbers are officially confused me. This is why I don't do math. Yes, 10 horns. Okay. The number 10. What did we say the number 10 was representative of?
completeness.
Completion, right? It's completeness. What about horns? What did we say horns were representative of? Power, right? Ooh, so this dragon has complete power. All right? Well, we're going to hold this. What about the diadems? Right? 7 diadems. A diadem is just a crown, right?
Authority.
This is authority, right? The ability to rule, all that sort of thing. And then 7 heads. Well, what's 7? Remember what 7 was representative of?
7,
Close.
completion.
No, that's 10. This is God's number, right? So he's got 7 heads, right? And you got wisdom and vision and these sorts of things. Well, so we had this dragon. Who is Satan, right? But it looks all powerful, like it has all authority, and it has all omniscience. It's all knowing, and it's all seeing, all of this kind of stuff. What's going on with that? Does that strike you as odd? It should. Why?
Because Satan's not omniscient.
Okay, because Satan's not omniscient. He's also not all powerful, and he also doesn't have all authority. So what is going on here? Right? So this is good. We have identified correctly the character, the dragon of Satan. We've identified correctly what these images on this dragon are meant to evoke. And we have also identified correctly that those two don't go together. So how do we resolve this?
He's wearing a God costume.
He's pretending. And what does Satan do? Right? He pretends. He pretends to be God all the time, right? You can say in a very real way, this is how he tricks Adam and Eve, right? Don't listen to God, listen to me. I know just as well as God, so you may as well listen to me, right? Satan's a pretender. He's a liar, right? In fact, is that what one of his names means, liar? Is that Satan? Or is that a different one? Deceiver? Anyway, I don't know. I wrote Satan down, and I thought for a second I got accidentally very clever. Right? So,
Jesus called him a liar from the beginning.
yeah, and that's what the devil does, right? He's lying about who he is. We're going to see this as a running theme going through these satanic forces that we're going to see today, right? Because we've only just started with our introduction here. right? The devil's lying. He's lying about who he is. Right? It's a great way to put it. He's wearing a God costume. Right? He's not God. He's pretending to be God. Right? He's not just trick-or-treating either. All right, verse 4. Mark, here we go. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. All right. What do we think is going on here?
That's a third of the fallen angels he
Yeah.
took with him.
So this is not a totally unique image, but it is a unique detail to the book of Revelation, right? So we know through like offhand references, and I think it's Ezekiel, if I remember correctly. It's either Ezekiel or one of the kings. It's Ezekiel in the condemnation against the city of Tyre. That Ezekiel, the prophecy goes weird and funky on us all of a sudden, right? Super normal earthly images, and by condemnation to Tyre, and we got war in heaven going on, and stars and weird stuff, super normal, right? And so we're pretty confident that this condemnation against the city of Tyre in the book of Ezekiel is not about the king of Tyre. That God, through Ezekiel, is speaking of this heavenly rebellion that took place. We know that it took place, and that's about all we know about it. You likely know more things about the heavenly rebellion, right? Like the motivation of Satan, right? Why did Satan rebel?
He wanted to be above God.
He wanted to be above God. The Bible doesn't say that. That's pop culture that says that. Specifically, this is most of what you know about the rebellion of Satan is from Paradise Lost. It is not, and other pop culture things like the Divine Comedy. Now, is pride of some sense a pretty good guess as to what Satan's problem and sin was? We don't know what Satan did wrong. The Bible doesn't actually tell us. It's a good guess that it's pride, because what does Satan do when he tries to tempt Adam and Eve? He goes after their pride, right? Pretends to be God, goes after their pride. So, and he does that a lot, right? He does that for Jesus, tempting him in the desert as well. So, it's a good guess that pride is what caused the fall of Satan, or at least that's what his sin and his rebellion was about. But we don't actually know that for sure. How many angels went with? Right? Because we know angels went with Satan, right? We know he is not the only one. We know there are demons as well. I mean, if you're curious about our proof text here, look at any of the exorcisms, right? Jesus clearly is talking to different demons. One guy is possessed by thousands of demons. So, it's not just Satan. How many angels fell with Satan?
Wasn't it a third?
It's our best guess, and this is why. This is the only text that gives us any sort of numerical counting of the angels that fell. Is this problematic?
No, not for me.
Well, there are two reasons. There are two reasons why this is problematic to us. First of all, remember our rule. Revelation is one of my favorite words, antilegomena. It means that some people didn't think this was part of the Bible, so you can't have a doctrine that comes only from this book. Right? Well, that number 1/3 comes only from this book. Additionally, this is an extremely... The whole book of Revelation is very metaphorical. We're in a hyper-metaphorical portion of a metaphorical book. And so is that number a third? Because we've run into the number 1/3 before. And we said that's meant to evoke an image, right? It's not that 1/3 of trees are going to burn up, or that 1/3 of the fish are going to die. It's just a lot of fish, right? So is this meant to be, oh, yep, you line up all the angels, you got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and everyone who got a 1, they fell, right? Or is it just to say a lot of angels fell? I don't know.
Wasn't in Ezekiel where they said
I don't think there's a number there.
Okay.
Here's the thing. If you want to believe that the number of angels that fell was 1/3, I am not going to stop you. It very well may be. This may be a literal depiction of how many stars fell from heaven. That may be exactly what this is meaning here. a number of angels fell from heaven, so it may as well be a third, right?
Well, a third doesn't mean much unless you know of what.
Well, that is also true, right? A third of 21 and a third of 21 million are two very different. Yeah. And so, but one thing we can gather from this number a third that's good, whether it's literal or figurative, is it's a minority,
Exactly.
right? There are still more
Good than that.
Angels.
Oh, yeah, so we just call them angels. Yeah. There are some more angels than there are demons, right? And so you don't need to. That's kind of what we can take away for sure. Again, if you want to believe that it's exactly a third of the angels that fell from heaven, you go right on believing that. I am not going to stop you. There are plenty of things that I believe about the Bible that I can't verify from a doctrinal standpoint, right? So I got to think this is how it went. Usually when you hear me reading the gospel reading and Jesus is being very sarcastic, which last week was a good example, right? Well, I'll tell you, right? That's how I think that went. I don't have any. Jesus could have not had a sarcastic bone in his body. It's entirely possible. But I'm pretty confident he had plenty of sarcastic
You know he
bones.
took some, and that's good enough.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so he took some, certainly not all, certainly not most. But we are given we're given details about the cosmic war, to harken back to our title, that we aren't given elsewhere. And okay, cool. That's good and exciting and all well. All right. Questions on this section here? All right. Now, I'm going to read something that I meant to read before we got going, but now is as good a time as any. If you look, I believe it's in your copy of this as well, in the historical considerations. The last line of the first paragraph, talking about all of these chapters, but I think, and the reason why I didn't just back up is I think we're going to really hit it, starting at verse 7 here. That is, these chapters visually explain to John why the events on earth are occurring, right? So, we have taken a break from our cyclical narrative in Revelation, right? That this woman and the dragon thing, right? The world just ended with the seventh trumpet, and now we got Jesus' ministry pops up all of a sudden. We're taking a break. The narrative pauses, the cycle pauses, and we're given context. John is given context, right? Why did the seven seals and all the, not the judgments, all the ways humans destroy each other, right? Why did all of that happen? I'm about to tell you, right? When the seven trumpets were blown and God brings judgment through plagues upon humanity, why did that happen? We're about to find out, right? The whole context of the book of Revelation, the backdrop of why does the church suffer in between the ascension and the return of Christ, we're about to see. God is peeling back the curtain and saying, this is what's going on in the background. This is what is driving these events. I mean, it's not driving human history, right? It's not like, well, this is why Dunkirk happened and all that. No. But this is why there's evil and suffering and the church is hurting and there's persecution, all of that. This is why. We're about to see big picture what's going on. And then we're going to go back into our cycles once this... Brighton doesn't call it an interlude because it's too long, basically, but it's an interlude. We had a very brief one in between the seals and the trumpets, which was just that silence in heaven, right? And that was 2-3 verses. This one's a few chapters long. So now we're going to see what's going on in the background, what's going on from a heavenly perspective that leads to the situations that we find ourselves in. The sufferings that the church undergoes, right? And so, what was the dragon incapable of doing in 1-6? Dragon had a goal and he failed. What was it?
He was going to devour Jesus.
Get rid of Jesus, right? I'm going after Jesus, right? And you can almost, it's great, right? The temptation of Jesus. Does anyone remember how it ends? Right? So the devil tempts Jesus 3 times, and Jesus rebuffs the temptation 3 times. And then what does the narrative tell us about Satan? And Satan left until an opportune time, right? And we see that opportune time for the devil comes at the cross, right? That's his moment. He's last-ditch effort. He thinks he gets it, right? The Passion of the Christ does a really good job of depicting
Yes,
this,
I
right?
love that
So
part.
in the Garden of Gethsemane, right, the devil comes up and is like, "You're toast. This ain't going to be good for you." And then we get that beautiful image from Genesis 3:15, the crushing of the python's head, right? And then Jesus does his thing, and then Satan's laughing down in hell, and then all of a sudden things go wrong, and he starts screaming, and that's the last we see of him, right?
Love that.
Well, you can almost, after the death and resurrection and ascension of Christ, say, and the devil gave up on Jesus until an opportune time, right? So he's not going after Jesus next. Who's he going after?
Us.
Goes after first the church, right? Goes out, okay, couldn't get Jesus, I'm getting his mom, right? Or can't get Jesus, I'm getting his bride, the church. So the devil can't get Christ, goes after the church. Can the devil get the church?
No.
No, right? The woman flees into the wilderness and she's protected from the time of the ascension until the time of the return, right? You sang not built on the rock. I was going to say that one. You did the church as one foundation. So close. We have a hymn about this, right? Built on the rock, the church will stand, even if steeples are falling. Right? We sang it a few weeks ago. It's an excellent hymn. But that hymn confesses nothing can stop the church from existing. Right? Which is, we're going to pause here. This is a good lesson for us. Especially I just went to the pastors' conference and we talked about the mission of the church, discipling people, coming alongside them so that we might grow the church, and that is a very good thing. But something for us to remember as we look for ways that we can join Jesus on his mission to, which is a kind of a book of one of the keynote speakers, to grow the kingdom is, with or without you, this kingdom ain't going away. Right? Now, you have a very real part in the mission of God, the mission of the church, and we're not going to take away from that, but take solace in the fact that, Angela, no matter how hard you try, you're not going to ruin the church. I know. I've seen you scheming up there. I can't ruin the church. You can't ruin the church. World rulers can't ruin the church. No one can destroy the church. The church will last until Christ returns. It's just going to happen. There's no question about that. All right, so Satan couldn't get Jesus, couldn't get the church. So what does Satan go after next?
Me.
You. Cool. Fun. Isn't that exciting? Right? You become Satan's target. We talk about this sometimes in baptism, right? That baptism is the painting of a target on your back. They also tell us at seminary, gentlemen, when you were baptized, that was painting a target on your back for the devil to shoot his arrows at. When you go to seminary and you become a pastor, guess what? You get another target on your back. So, yay. But you don't have to worry about that. So you only got one. See? It'll be all right. So the rest of kind of what we're covering today, and we've already seen it to one extent or another in the book of Revelation, is the devil's coming after you. Right? And so let's see how that happens. All right? Look at that. Oh, that was a good transition. Not often do I have a smooth transition like that. But when I do, I ruin it by pointing it out. Can I have a volunteer to read 7 through 12? Because all the way to 18 is too much. Thank you, Bill.
Now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent which we call the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they love not their lives even unto death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short.
All right, we're gonna be able to go through these sections quickly because I got ahead of myself, but that's okay. All right, we got a war in heaven, right? Everyone knows about this, right? Michael and his angels. Oh, there's another great hymn about this. Angels ride at his side. Anyway, Christ the Lord of hosts, I'm shaking. Ooh, it's good. But if you don't know what it is, go listen to it. Christ the Lord of hosts, I'm shaking. There's a hymn about this, right? Michael and his angels fight against the dragon, kick him out of heaven, right? He comes crashing down to earth. When does this happen? I love the confidence of this group. You also know that when I ask a question like that, you probably don't know the answer, or your first guess is probably not quite right. So, most of us, John Milton being one of us in this case, tend to think that the war in heaven happened before the fall of man. But it seems, and my argument is that it didn't. The fall of the angels happened before the fall of man, right? That's Genesis, right? That's easy, verifiable stuff. The war in heaven doesn't seem to have happened at that point, right? What happens just before verse 6? What does Jesus do? He goes up into heaven, right? And so, and there's more reasons than just Revelation, trust me. But if we're going to follow this timeline, Christ ascends into heaven, and then when Jesus gets there after having won, Michael and the angels go, all right, it's time. And they kick Satan and the angels out, right? And so Satan and the angels do not have a place in heaven anymore. I had an ascension sermon a few years ago where I talked about this briefly, right? Because it's always been weird to me that Jesus left, right? So, he had to, right? Well, like, third greatest festival in the church, the day Jesus left? Really? And there were 4 reasons, but one of them was so that Jesus could kick the devil out of heaven, right? Well, so, hold on. Why is the devil in heaven? What is he doing in heaven before Jesus gets there to kick him out? If we're going with this timeline here.
Well, isn't he accusing his brethren?
He's accusing us, right? And that's what it says, right? Satan's whispering in the Father's ear, oh, look at Jeff. Oh, he's bad, right? Oh, you don't like him. You get rid of him, right? I got a place for him. It's ready to go, right? Send him to where I'm going, right? That's what the devil was doing, right? And here's it doesn't just come from the book of Revelation. I have it highlighted for me, and it's in yours as well. So this is some key insights to Revelation 12, 7 to 18. It's the first point, and it's the first majority of that section. When did this war, this expulsion of the dragon and his evil host, take place? According to 12:5, it happened at the ascension of Christ. Apparently, before Christ's victory and ascension, the devil could stand at will before God and bring accusation against God's saints. And then, do you have this little parenthetical? Look at that. Job 1, 6 through 11, 2, 1 through 5, and Zechariah 3, 1 through 7. So we have other verses that actually support this sense that, oh, guess what? Satan can come and accuse you before God, or at least he could, right? But at Christ's enthronement at the right hand of God, Satan was forever banished from God's presence, and his place in the heavenly court was taken from him, right? Why? Why would it be until after the ascension of Christ that the devil was kicked out from his accusatory role in the heavenly court?
Because Jesus is there at the heaven.
Well, up until Jesus did his thing on the cross, right? Satan had standing to accuse you. He didn't really, right? But they're mine. I don't care what they did, right? You can whisper all you want about Jeff, Satan, but Jesus died for him. And so you got nothing. What do you have that can beat that? He's got nothing. So, right? Bailiff, Michael, I'm kicking him out. We're done with him, right? And so Satan can't accuse you before God anymore, right? And speaking of, and this is also some things that I've preached on in the past, Satan cannot accuse you before God the Father anymore. We also have some Hebrews imagery that kind of lends to this. So what does he do instead?
Tries to tempt us.
Yes, but that's not quite what I'm looking for here. He accuses you to you, right? I've talked about it this way. I think it's a beautiful or an insightful way to think about the devil in his tempting work, right? Before the devil comes to you and says, "Did God really say? Just do it," right? It's no big deal. And then that's what we think of when we think of temptation, right? That's what you got the devil on the shoulder in cartoons, right?
Yeah.
But then you do it. No more temptation, right? Satan's done with you. No. As soon as you do whatever, as soon as you give in to the temptation, Satan's on your other shoulder saying, "You wretched, terrible scum of the earth. How could you have done that? Don't you know this is what God said?" Right? You've gone too far this time. Jesus can never forgive you. Now, it's a load of crap. Right? It's not true, but Satan can't say it to the big guy anymore, so he says it to you instead. Because maybe, just maybe, he'll get you to believe him. Right? So temptation actually works both ways. Before the trespass, it is the temptation to trespass. Right? After, it's the temptation to, the word is despair, to not believe in the forgiveness of God. Right? To say, nope, I'm too good of a sinner, you're right, devil. My sin was so big that Jesus' death didn't cover it. Right? Which sounds ridiculous when we say it that way, but it really doesn't sound ridiculous right after you've messed up and the devil's whispering in your ear. Then it sounds like the most reasonable thing that anyone's ever said to you, right? In fact, it's this backward-looking temptation, I think, is the more sinister of the two. Anyone can tempt you to do. Devil don't even need to be around to tempt you to do stuff you're not supposed to, or to not do, right? All that. But that's the hard one. And which one is more ready to separate you from God? It's despair. They both will. Don't get me wrong. But despair is, you will be far more willing to walk away from God if you think He can't forgive you. Then, oh man, I'm screwing up a lot and I keep doing it. Right? So, Satan is now accusing you. All right, any other questions? We can move a little bit more quickly through this section here. Any other questions on this half chunk that we read here? All right. A reader for 13 through 18.
And when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. But the woman was given the 2 wings of the great eagle, so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness, to the place where she is to be nourished for a time, and times, and a half a time. The serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, to sweep her away with a flood. But the earth came to the help of the woman, and the earth opened its mouth, and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from his mouth. Then the dragon became furious with the woman, and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God, and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And he stood on the sand of the sea.
All right, so, like I said, I got ahead of myself. I was supposed to wait till here to say, but Satan can't get Jesus, can't get the church, so he goes after the other offspring of the church, after us, right? Now, there's this image of the serpent pouring water out on the woman and the earth swallowing up the water. Brighton's, let's see, he has the section there so you can read it. It's the last one. Mine had a grammar mistake near the end, just so that you guys know. But basically, Brighton's understanding of this is the devil uses miraculous looking means to destroy the church, but God, through real miracles, saves the church. I'm not terribly satisfied with that. I don't know what a good or better explanation of this is. Joe, I don't know if you have any. Again, though, what I want to avoid is, let's think back. When was the church almost destroyed by a flood or by water? And I think that's wrong. Also, I can't think of a time that would work. So, and Satan's already attacking after you. So clearly, this has already happened. So I think, for me, I'm willing to kind of just say I'm not quite sure what that means and push forward. But if any of you are really bothered by it, I brought the blue book over there in reference to a question some of you might ask. And you're welcome to read through the relevant section if you'd like. See what Brighton has to say. If not, I have a couple other Revelation commentaries, but I haven't read those, so I can't attest to them. Any questions on chapter 12? All right, now I promised that we'd talk about 666, and that's at the end of this chapter, so we got to keep moving along. All right. They want us to do the whole chapter at once. That doesn't make sense. That's too much. Let's do 1 through 10, and we'll give that. So, because that's the first beast. All right. Volunteer to read 13, 1 through 10 for me. Thank you, Mark.
Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshipped the dragon who gave authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" And he was given a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemies. And he was given authority to continue for 42 months. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given to him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints.
All right, the first beast. The two beasts are, because there's 2 of them. I think the 2 beasts are easy to understand in a generalized sense, although the details are a bit, we'll get there. That is to say, I really like Brighton's understanding here, but we need to kind of push our way to understand what's going on. As far as how this beast is described in its appearance, we're not going to spend much time on. Like the whole leopard thing, sorry. But we do see, again, we have 7 heads, 10 crowns, and horns, right? So again, we have this beast is doing what?
Ruling.
You're right, but not now. You will be right in a later question. Is doing what?
He's imitating God.
He's wearing the God costume too. So this first beast, the first and the second beast for that matter, we need to recognize that the dragon and the 2 beasts are all connected to one another. You might even go so far as to say they are 3 heads of the same thing. But we're not going to push on that too hard just yet. I think it occurs to me going through here that it might be helpful for us to understand the first beast to do narrow and broad, although I wasn't planning on doing that, but I think it's helpful. This first beast is given authority, right? It sits on the throne that the devil gives it, or that Satan gives to it. It rules over the nations, and it is haughty and blasphemous, cursing God and destroying the saints, right? And I don't tend to like to do this, but I think it will help us. There is, I think, a typological thing, just like Mary was, that will help us here. And that is, we don't have enough time, so I'm not going to do the Socratic thing. And that is, think the first beast as the Roman Empire in the days of the early church. Now, I don't want to go too far with this, but I think it will help us understand what's going on. What was the Roman church what was the Roman Empire to the church of the first few centuries?
Persecuted.
It was a persecutor, right? If you want details on persecution, like Roman era persecution, I think we went on quite a bit about that in the first lesson. I know I talked about it recently, and this is the first class I've taught since summer, so it was probably lesson 1 here, where we talked all about Roman persecutions. But Rome is a persecutor of the church, right? It has earthly authority, earthly power, and it uses that earthly power and earthly authority to do what? To persecute and destroy the church, yes, although I want us to recognize that the church cannot be destroyed. More precisely, it persecutes the people of the church, right? It persecutes the members of the church. And so what then, if Rome is the narrow understanding of the first beast, what does Rome embody that might be the broad sense? Any ideas?
An establishment, like a worldly ruling
Like the
establishment.
Perfect. Brighton refers to this beast as the political beast.
Oh.
Now, of course, it's only during the Roman Empire that people worship the government and think that the government is in the place of God and has all rule and authority, and everything that the government does is well, good, right, and salutary, and that the government can solve all their problems, right? And by the way, if you are thinking, oh no, that sounds like that political party, you're wrong. You're correct. It does sound like that political party, but it also sounds like the other one. Both sides of our aisle commit this problem.
Oh yeah.
Recognizing that the state is the solution to earthly problems. If you don't think that I'm right, we can talk individually, or you can go listen to your favorite pundits and how they talk about the role of the government. Because I promise you, both sides of the aisle do this. And by the way, they've been doing it since 1776, right? At least in the United States. And Jeff, why was the United States not guilty of this sin before 1776?
Because it didn't exist before.
Because it didn't exist before 1776, right? Before that, it was the British Crown, or whatever, right? The only reason Americans have not been committing this sin, or weren't committing it in 1775, is because they weren't Americans, they were British citizens. They were still doing it, hence the revolution, right? Ooh, here, look, we got a political problem, or solution to all of our worldly problems. We don't need God to fix it, we can do it ourselves. That's not a commentary on the historical morality of the revolution. That is just a recognition that humans generally do this, right? We look through the Old Testament. Are you kidding me? That is the whole problem. It's not the whole problem. That is the massive root of the issue with the Israelites having a king, right? Samuel recognizes this. He says, God, don't let them do this because they're trying to replace me. And God says, no, they're not trying to replace you, Samuel. They're trying to replace me. They are worshiping the political beast. If we have a king like all the other kingdoms have a king, we'll be just fine. Right? No, that's not it. And so this first beast is the political beast. Is this beast of earthly rule and authority, and this beast causes humans to worship it. Right? And you can think of it in 21st century American politics. You can think about it in the sense of Rome, right? Really, in the narrow sense, you can just insert polis, right? It doesn't have to be Rome, although Rome, I think, exemplifies it very well. Polis is just city, or polis is city, but it is the governing authority, right? So you can put United States government up there. You can put the British monarchy up there. You can put the Chagatai Khanate up there if you so choose. I'm listening to the history podcast. Insert any political earthly ruler there, and you put David up there for that matter, right? This first beast is the beast of political rule, and it causes people to fall away from God, right? It blasphemes God, and we see that exemplified, I think, a lot in Rome, which is why I put it up there to kind of help us get there. Does this make sense? I'm not. You're tracking with me again. This is one of these areas that I think we've run into it in Revelation before. That kind of the impression is at least as valuable as, well, here's my micro analysis of, well, the leopard had 87 hairs on its left pinky toe, right? Like, okay, that's good. That's helpful to get us there, but I think the impressions are helpful, at least at the level we're doing this. All right. Yeah, for the sake of time, we'll just push on. Volunteer to read the remainder of the chapter. Actually, you know what? I'm going to call on a volunteer. Steve, would you be willing to read this one for me?
This is the one, 11 through 18.
11 through the end of the chapter.
Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth and burn people. And by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast, I just accidentally turned the page. So that it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Also it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark. That is the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666.
All right. I had to make you read it since that's the first word, the first number out of your mouth when you walked in here. All right, we have the second beast, and we got the number. Oh, we got the number, guys. Okay, well, we need to get there first, right? And we will. So, I don't have a good, narrow second beast, but I'm just going to write something up there and it'll basically give us the broad as well. And so, well, what does this beast do? Let's, since I can't be the grand reveal like that, let's send it this way. What does the second beast do?
People worship the first beast.
Okay, so its intention is that people will not worship it necessarily, but worship the first beast, right? And how does it accomplish that goal?
Miracles.
Miracles. Right? Ooh, miracles. Oh, I got it. All right, Magi. I'm writing down there. And no, these are not the Magi you're thinking of, unless you are extremely insightful. We are not talking about We Three Kings of Orientar. They are Magi. There are 2 other times in the Bible that Magi appear, and I think they both work. But the first one's the one I'm more interested in. Does anyone know the other 2 times? One's in the New Testament, one's in the Old Testament. That Magi appear.
Oh, what was that one guy? Baal?
No, he's a prophet. So they had actually another name, and you guys are going to love this, and you're never going to forget it. So Magi is the Persian version of this name. The other one is, And I kid you not, it is that word. It is not pronounced Jedi, though. It's pronounced Jedi, although it is why Jedi are called Jedi. Did you know that there were Jedi in the Bible? I bet you didn't, right? Other than the fact that Obi-Wan Kenobi is Space Jesus, but that's an internet meme. The Jedi were the Magi in Egypt, right? This is perfect, right? And I think I mentioned Prince of Egypt last week, and this is not a Prince of Egypt class. I do like the movie, though. But we see this, and it comes out of the biblical narrative, right? Moses comes to Pharaoh in the movie, to say, let my people go, and all that good stuff, right? And he says, well, I've never heard of this God. Who is this God, right? And Moses has, in the movie, only one thing, although in the Bible he has more things to do, right? The first thing Moses does in the Bible is he takes his hand, puts it in his cloak, right? And he pulls it out, and he has leprosy on his hand. And he puts it back in his coat, and then he's good. And then Pharaoh calls for the Jedi. He calls for his magi, his magic men. Says, do it. They put hands in their cloaks and leprosy, and they put a hand in, and they're good, right? And then Moses says, okay. He puts his staff out, and it becomes a snake, right? Remember this? And then the Jedi, although again, Jedi is not the word in the Bible because that's an Egyptian word, not Hebrew. But the Magi then put their staffs out, and they become snakes. Now, of course, and it's very dramatic during one of the best songs of Prince of Egypt. Not the best, but one of the better ones. That Moses' serpent devours the other two, and then Moses picks it up and it's a staff again, right? What are the Magi? What are these Jedi? What is their goal? By the way, they try and repeat all of the plagues, and a few of them they can, but not all of them. What is their goal, though?
To get us to worship the first beast.
The Pharaoh, in this case, in the narrow sense, right? Don't look to your God. Look to Pharaoh, right? In the movie, Pharaoh repeats often, I am the evening and morning star, right? I am God. I am Ra, basically. And so the role of the second beast, the role of the Jedi, is to point people through use of miracles. And by the way, I do think those Jedi were actually able to do those things because of demons. There's a reason Moses wins the fight, but it's to get people to worship Pharaoh, right? And so in our broad sense here, Brighton calls this the religious beast. Now, how many of you have heard Christianity is not a religion, it's a relationship? You heard this before? I understand where it comes from. I understand what it's attempting to accomplish. I inwardly cringe every time I hear that. It hurts me. Christianity is a religion, guys. It is. It's the one true religion. But you hear, this is not what it's talking about. It's not like, oh, organized Christianity is the devil, right? There are people out there who think that. We as Lutherans are very much not those people, right? This is false religion. Right? This is false religion from Islam, Hinduism to wolves in sheep clothing, heresy kind of thing, right? And it takes all sorts of those forms, right? And what it does is it directs away from God and often towards the world, worldliness. Not necessarily, right? Away from God to the president, right? Although there are a number of groups out there that do that, even in our context. That's pretty blatant, but that's not all this is. This is everything that is pointing your attention, using religion away from God towards the things of this world. All right? Now, other than the number, any questions? All right, what's up with the number? We got 666. All right, you've been waiting for it. So, we need to, as with other things, we need to break this number down. The number 666 is composed of what numbers? Well, we don't say 666, right? We got 3 sixes here, right? All right, we've had 3 before. What's 3? 3 is the number that belongs to whom? God, right? Father, Son, Holy Spirit, the Divine Trinity, right? Okay, so hold that. What about 6? What's going on with the number 6?
1 less than 7.
It is 1 less than 7. Okay, what's 7? What's important about 7?
Creation.
Okay, ooh, good. So you can even just say it's God's number. You said it's the number of creation, right? And it's specifically the 7th day is when God rested. So it's God's creation, all of that. What was created on day 6?
Man.
Yes. Man was created on day 6. Who brought sin into the world? Man brought sin into the world. The baptismal font of the seminary, I love it. The base of the baptismal font is a hexagon. And it's a hexagon because number 6 is the number of man, and it's also the number of sin, because humans brought sin into this world. Then the pillar is 3 pillars for the Trinity, the source of salvation, and then the basin is an octagon, which is for obvious reasons. If you don't know what those reasons are, you can ask me about it later. I'm going to leave that one as a cliffhanger, right? But number 8 is, by the way, our baptismal font's an octagon. Most baptismal fonts have the number 8 in them somewhere. Like I said, if you don't know why already, you can talk to me later. I'll give you all the reasons, but got to get you to come back to me for something, right? So 6 is the number of man, and it's also the number of sin. By the way, verse 18, right, so this last verse here is our clue as to why this is the correct interpretation. Although, well, my edition, the ESV, says this. The number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. That is what the Greek says literally, and so that's why it's written in there. You'll also see, and I think it's a better translation, and I have no authority to say that, but Brighton, who is way better at Greek than me, says it's a better translation, and I believe him, that it should be rendered, it is a human number, and that's an appropriate way to translate it. And so we kind of say, oh, it's a human number. It is literally the number of man, not of a man. You can drop, there's no indefinite article in Greek, so you can drop that. That's like the word a doesn't exist in Greek. And so it's okay, we can say it's the number of man. Or it's a human number. It's the number of humanity. It's the number 6, right? Humanity, sin. Okay, but why do we have 3? What's going on with the 6 things? Well, the triplicate is whose number?
Trinity.
It's the Trinity. All right, so we have Trinity and we have man and sinfulness. All right, so we put them together and we have this unholy Trinity. All right, we have, as we've been saying, we have this Trinity that's wearing a God costume. That's not the Trinity. It's wearing a Trinity costume in this case, right? Conveniently, we have 3 things here, right? The dragon, the beast, the political beast, and the religious beast, right? You can also, and there are different ways you can kind of do this. You can also say the unholy Trinity of sin, death, and the devil. And Brighton will do that elsewhere in his commentary, and he jumps through some hoops to get there. But we also have, right, sin, death, and the devil. This is that unholy Trinity. This is evil wickedness that is pretending to be God, that is afflicting the people of God, right? It is not a number that's going to be tattooed on a boy named Damien right there. That's, like I said, a good movie, but not biblically accurate, right? Also, we don't need to be afraid of the number 666, right? You're not afraid of the number 1260. You're not afraid of the number 144,000. You're not afraid of the number 3.5. You don't need to be afraid of the number 666. Technically speaking, being afraid of the number 666 is breaking the 2nd commandment, right? Using the Lord's name in vain. This is also, right, the superstition, right? Seeing the number 666 and going, oh, that's superstitious, right? No, we're not superstitious. That's a pagan thing. It's not a Christian thing. Christians aren't superstitious because God told us not to. The very, very short version of that. So you don't need to be afraid of this number. The number is just a number that appears here to identify this unholy Trinity, this evil, wicked sinfulness that is the world, sin, death, the devil, all that kind of stuff. questions on the number? All right, we are very low on time, and how I think, for the sake of time, we're going to manage it is we're just not going to cover 14. If this gives you heartburn, feel free, and I will go through it with you one-on-one outside of the class. I'm happy to do that, or I'll even photocopy the pages out of Brighton's commentary. I'm not sure if legally I'm allowed to do that, but I this is, you get copyright exceptions for the sake of education. So if you're interested in 14, the very brief overviews, we do see something of an image of the end of the world. The 144,000 show back up. The 144,000 here are the ones who don't get that mark of the beast, which is that number, the unholy trinity written on their foreheads, right? Rather, what do they have on their foreheads? All right, we saw this in 7. They have the seal of God, and if you want to do it, and I think it's valid, on the number, or on the foreheads of the 144,000 is not 666, but is 777, right? Or marked with the name of Christ, rather than the name of the beasts, right? It's not what this says, but the image holds true. So if you want to think of it that way, I think it's a good way to understand it. They are kept aside, they suffer, but they make it through, right? The devil comes after you, but you will prevail over the devil, right? This is that Romans passage. I think it's Romans 8 that we read if we ever do New Year's services again, right? What then shall overcome us? Nakedness, famine, sword, all of that. No, nothing. I mean, all those things are more than conquerors. Now, our heads may have been taken off by a lion, but we're still more than conquerors because Christ has died for us. We have his name written on our foreheads, and we are good. We will be raised from the dead. At this point, the angels pop up. I say fallen is Babylon the Great, which is just a great little line and is in one of my favorite songs that we've talked about. And basically we see the judgment. Let's see. This is verse 14 of 14. Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and seated on the cloud, one like a son of man, with a golden crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. That's Jesus, right? And he sends his reapers out. And it says, angels, right? Go take your sickles, reap the earth. Jesus has returned, right? And we see parables, right? The sheep, the wheat and the weeds, right? God separated them. Those with the 666 and those with the 777 are separated out. We see the end of the world. So we see that the dragon couldn't get Jesus, it couldn't get Mary, and in a very real eschatological end times, end of the world, return of Christ sense, even if the dragon eats you, it can't get you either. You too will be kept safe because Christ conquers, Christ rules, Christ has authority over all things, right? Remember, that's the major theme of this book, is Jesus is in control. Even when the beasts and the dragons seem to be getting the upper hand. And they often do. Most of the time when we're looking at this time of tribulation in the book of Revelation, you might be thinking, oh man, God's people are toast, right? And they never are. It may not be pleasant for them, they're still suffering, but they still make it through. Good. Any questions? Now, I will say, none of you asked the question, and I'm not going to tell you what it is, but there was a question that would have made Karen Lecky's day. Brought endless joy to her, because there was a question that was going to lead me to mention Polycarp. And so, I told you I'd get it in there. Anyway, none of you asked the question, so I'm not going to tell you why I got to Polycarp. That is for another time. I know. It's also what that little tiny 12 up there is for. But
And he was the baby in the crowd?
no, it's roundabout how we would have gotten there. But for the sake of Karen Lecky and for her joy to be complete, I would have done it. By the way, she told me that she'd roll her eyes out of her head if I mentioned Polycarp. But they're still in there. So let's close with prayer, as we typically do with our Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. All right, thank you all. Remember, no class next week, no class the week after. In 3 weeks, we will reconvene to talk about